One, two, three, four.
Hello, you're listening to the SKYLIT Books podcast series. We are a general interest independent bookstore located in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. This year, because of the coronavirus pandemic, we've had to close our store and cancel in-person events. But SKYLIT is your neighborhood bookstore, and we are finding ways to create community even while we're far apart. In the coming weeks, we'll be putting out lots of new audio content to help you discover new books, connect with authors, and check in with your favorite booksellers. To learn more about how you can help keep SKYLIT alive, please visit our website at skylitbooks.com or check out our social media accounts on Twitter and Instagram. You can subscribe to the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Thank you for listening and enjoy.
Hello, lovely listeners, and welcome back to SKYLIT. This is the SKYLIT Books podcast series, and I'm your host, Maddie Gobbo, the events manager at SKYLIT Books here in Los Angeles. Right now, you've made it to 2021. Congratulations. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast over the past year as we've reconfigured and made this a new space for authors to have these conversations. Today, we're really looking forward to this conversation with Mark De Silva and Rachel Allen. They're going to be talking about Mark's new book, Points of Attack. I'm going to give them a proper intro in just a moment, but I wanted to let you know we are still open for in-store shopping, 11 to 7 on weekdays and 10 to 8 on weekends. We also offer curbside pickup those same hours, and online ordering is available 24/7 on our website, skylitbooks.com. All right, so let's get into it. So Points of Attack. This is a collage of critical reflections written in the tradition of the short essay, running through Francis Bacon and Roland Barthes. The novelist, philosopher, and former New York Times opinion staffer Mark De Silva looks into matters of both common curiosity and special concern in America today. Technological evolution, virtuality, terrorism, the future of the self, the individual's place in a globalized society, the species' place in the natural world, the state of the arts, and the animadversions of the sciences. Above all, Points of Attack is a handbook of the ways of the good life in bad times and an inoculation against presumption in an era when the axioms of liberal democratic life have come undone and the end of history once again appears a long way off. Mark De Silva is the author of the novel Square Wave and the fiction editor of 3am magazine. Points of Attack is his first book of nonfiction. His new novel, The Logos, will be published in the fall of 2021. In conversation with Mark is Rachel Allen. Rachel Allen is a writer based in New York. Her work has appeared in Best American Experimental Writing 2018, Unpublishable, an anthology, Full Stop, The Fanzine, and Guernica, of which she is an editor. She is also an assistant blog editor at Asymptote and a graduate student in philosophy. In 2019, she was in residence with the Tulsa Artist Fellowship. Mark and Rachel, welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you, Maddie.
Thanks a lot. Hi.
Hi.
So when we met, you were working on your second novel, What Would Become the Logos, and you eventually told me that it had spawned this second smaller work, a book of aphorisms is how you described it, and that's still the description under which I think of Points of Attack. Do you want to start by reading one of these aphoristic pieces?
Sure.
Creative austerity, maybe?
Creative austerity. The thing about creative drive, which you can just as well think of as a kind of pressure, is that there are so many ways it can be dissipated. Whether I find that I'm not writing much of anything, or even just anything with real vigor to it, I usually discover, and always as if for the first time, that there are too many valves open, bleeding off this pressure. The releases are many, and some are unexpected. Food, for one. Curiously, I can't write anything worthwhile on a full stomach. In fact, hunger itself may serve as a useful metaphor for thinking about creativity. A certain kind of intellectual and emotional deprivation can yield work of greater intensity. All sorts of pleasures, both worthy and trivial, can seem to blunt it. Watching films, reading, browsing the web, socializing, romance, too much sleep even. So to find my way back to my sharpest writing, Spartan self-denial is generally the answer, which is to say, to come around to the earlier metaphor, the valves must be tightened and the pressure must build. Invariably, within a few days, I reach a state of productive agitation, restless to write again, to probe with words. Almost magically, a reassuring force is restored to my writing, to my mind.
Um, so yeah, you've commented here on sort of the conditions of your making of books, and specifically you comment on your need for deprivation as a condition for creation. Is this book a result of any specific privations?
Uh, I mean, I constrained myself to certain short forms. I mean, it's self-imposed limitations, but they were written partly as the result of working at uh, a newspaper and a magazine, and some of the editorial tasks I had there. So um, some of the ideas, maybe topics that came across my mind, came through that channel. But the compression is sort of a self-imposed constraint to write in sort of unusual length, 300 to 500 words. So longer than an aphorism, I would say. Maybe I may have started them with that idea, but also shorter than a proper essay. So it sort of generates sort of unusual results when you work at a length that isn't typically worked at.
Hmm. I guess I was also sort of watching you work on this and on your novel, which was growing to sort of unexpectedly uh, gargantuan proportions. That's the logos. And I was that a book was sort of unusually florid, big, and I was wondering what relationship this quite compressed, tight book in that form bears to uh, the fullness and maximalism of the other book.
Yeah, I don't know that. Um, yeah, it certainly is a very sharp contrast in that way. I mean, they both employ a pretty reduced kind of concentrated style, shall I say? So that even the logos or square wave, this the sentence structure sometimes can be on the longer side, but ultimately, I think the density of the writing is something that people have noted about those books, and I think equally that's here. I just have you know I'm focused on not on fiction there, so I have to follow a fictional world rather than topical issues. Whereas this one, there's no such obligation, so I was able to sort of stick to the world itself in a very direct way rather than mediating it through fictional posits and whatnot. So maybe that's part of the reason for the differences.
Can you say more about how your thinking works differently in a fictional world versus in this world that we all share?
I just mean, your obligations are to development and to character and to place and setting. I mean, those are lingering sort of in the background of as you compose, or I compose from notes, note cards, having sort of certain descriptions of scenes and imagery and other things. Whereas with the nonfiction, I mean, there's none of that is going on. I could just cut to the chase, go straight after a topic. It has its own costs. It doesn't have the same imaginative power. I don't think. I don't think almost any nonfiction has that type of imaginative power as great fiction, anyways. But it has its other virtues. Really following a line of thought in a very careful, precise way. That's what I try to do in Points of Attack, anyways. That's partly why the pieces are so short. That they are very dense, and I try to trace a line of thought, uh, as carefully as I can, and using every word for sort of maximum effect. So in that way, it borrows from the tradition of the aphorism. It's just longer than an aphorism. So it's difficult to explain beyond that, except that the pieces fall at a length I haven't seen much of. I mean, even Francis Bacon's essays, which are the shortest that you really find in the tradition, anyways. These are significantly shorter than those. Certainly, Montaigne wrote at much greater length, and most essayists do. There are also essayists who obviously write in fragments these days. That, Sarah Manguso or Maggie Nelson, and that's just a very different type of writing. These I wouldn't consider fragments; they're complete, rounded thoughts. So that's another difference.
Yeah, I think you're right to say that compression, even in your longest writing, in your novels, I think compression does play a big role in just your style of writing. I think that's an inheritance maybe from your background in analytic philosophy, where the emphasis is so much on concision and on the choice of the right word. And I think that you've indicated in this book and elsewhere that there's a close linkage for you between writing and thinking. And maybe you could speak a bit more to how that relationship between, maybe what that relationship is with compression.
Yeah, I think working in such a short form, clearing out unnecessary words or unnecessary clauses is really just a way of clearing out unnecessary ideas. So I think that's the purpose mainly, is one tracks the other very closely in the way that I write anyways. And that probably does come from my training in analytic philosophy, where you try not to let your metaphors get out of control. There is a kind of discipline of language use that the typical fiction writer, or even the creative nonfiction writer, as they call it, probably doesn't utilize in quite the same way. So there is a kind of rigor and regimentation to the writing, I think, that maybe is somewhat distinctive and definitely comes from a tradition in philosophy that emphasizes precision over sort of florid metaphors and the like.
Are the aims of thinking in such precise terms different than they might be in a more florid style? Do you think the actual goals of thinking are different?
I don't know. I think what I'm doing here, anyways, in Points of Attack, is certainly not trying to put the final word on anything, or defend a thought in the way that one would in a journal article or a monograph. So that way, it's certainly not a piece of analytic philosophy. If it were, it would be a deeply flawed one. I like writing in ways that other people don't write. So that's what it essentially is. It is not really like almost any other writing I've seen. So, it can be a little bit puzzling, I suppose, but it's written in a way that uses a very precise form, but borrows on sort of essayistic traditions that maybe are more open to ambiguity and questions. I mean, there's some relationship to Wittgenstein as well, though he tended to be more fragmented where these are more polished. For me, I would think of Bacon's collections of essays. That really, to me, is probably the closest in terms of inspiration. In terms of how topics are treated. More recently, I suppose, John Berger, right, in his stuff on which is mainly visual arts, that he focuses on, whereas my focus is not. But he writes it as maybe a similar length. Maybe there's something there. But again, I don't know if it has that same sort of that flavor of analytic philosophy, which is a kind of, it's just quite intense and pointed in a way that maybe he's not.
Do you want to maybe read another one? It's good observation.
Sure. Good observation. Ceteris paribus, surveillance extracts better behavior from us. With someone watching over our shoulders, or just the threat of someone's so doing, temptation evaporates. Empirical studies are hardly required here. Plato's ring of Gyges suffices. What sort of ethical difference does observation's taming of behavior make, though? Certainly, fewer ignoble acts occur, and that utilitarian truth must count for quite a lot. But if the only thing preventing you from doing wrong is the likelihood of being caught, it is prudence, not rightness, driving your actions. It is behavior under ring of Gyges conditions, where your deeds are untraceable and not utility, that matters to morality, qua character, which is only to say the virtuous behave themselves whether or not anyone is looking. And a world in which people behave for reasons of goodness must be superior to a world in which we might suppose there are no more immoral acts committed, yet such is achieved only through prudential reasoning and the deterrent of surveillance. Perhaps prudence is all that liberal states can reasonably expect from their citizens. They build only the thinnest of moral outlooks into the law or public life generally, just enough to sanctify liberty, democracy, and hence their own legitimacy. As a consequence, modern democracies don't have much purchase on their subjects' hearts. They aren't aligned with their citizens' worldviews in any but the shallowest sense. A prudential attitude to citizenship seems a natural partner to this managerial conception of the state. So long as the referee, the state, doesn't cite you for an infraction of the ground rules, you are free to commit yourself to an ethic of your own. The best we can do under such conditions is to make our referee as close to omniscient as possible, so that infractions don't go unnoticed. Expecting citizens to obey an honor code, which is what morality proper requires, is simply asking too much. Of course, a less disenchanted politics is possible, provided we can meet its spiritual rigors. The state would need to trade its referee's whistle for a coach's playbook. It would need to take sides and positively back a rich and particular conception of social life and of justice, so that subjects come to see cheating the state as tantamount to cheating themselves.
This one of my favorite things, picks up a number of the themes or threads maybe that emerge only from reading Points of Attack as a whole work. There's sort of recurrent notes that come across in multiple pieces. You've got a bit of secularism / enchantment. Observation comes up again and again in different forms of commitment and bias, solitude and commune. And one thing I thought about a lot and wondered about a lot was how you see the relationship between these discrete pieces and the work as a whole. How do you, I guess just to start out, how do you see that operating here?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote the individual pieces, semi-autonomously as they sort of cropped up in my mind, whether a certain topic was put before me through, as I say, other editorial tasks. But then in the rewrites, I wrote through them. So there's, I think, a lot of bleed through from that what was started as sort of loose impressions became, I guess, individually, the pieces became sharper, but there also became a sort of a through line of a certain sort. And that's just a function, I guess, of, arrangement and sequence, grouping. The pieces have been, sort of put under rubrics, animals, futures, freedoms, these sorts of groupings that I've used sort of halfway through. I sort of found that, there's these kind of affinities and the sort of themes. And I think as I wrote through, it became a sort of unified body of work rather than a set of discrete essays. So there definitely is like coloring and complexion that runs through them. So it isn't an essay collection in the sense of a set of discrete pieces that were sort of collected just for the convenience of the reader, as it were, to have them all in one place. It is probably, there's an effect of accumulation in going through them, of a kind of, you'll see issues coming up in different orientations or different questions being asked with the same maybe example.
There's the effect of accumulation, and there are the groupings, but I'm also curious about whether there's and then there are counter positionings and counter arguments made, and you approach from different angles. I'm curious also about whether you see the book as a whole as making um, its own argument almost separately from the discrete pieces, or not separately, but as a consequence of the variety of discrete pieces. Is there a whole that?
Well, I think there's a sort of sensibility on display. I don't know if I would if it's anything as strong as an argument per se, but there is, something is enacted or shown.
Mhm.
I don't know that it's really defended or argued for per se, but um, there's sort of a way of sort of exploratory thinking that I think the pieces share, and that over time, you know, um, one gets the sense of a certain narrative personality. I do think the pieces convey that's the continuity. I mean, really, topically, the book is all over the place. It doesn't really try to limit itself to any one thing or try to delve extremely deeply into one issue. It ranges sort of as freely as a mind does in any everyday context. It's not meant as a study of one thing. But I think over time, what is not argued for but put on display is certainly a sensibility, and maybe that would be missing from any excerpt or individual piece. I think you'd probably have to take 20 or 30 pages, and by that point, something begins to reverberate. But that's the hope, anyway.
And maybe you can talk a little bit about how the sensibility on display relates to the sort of intuitions it also attempts to uh, maybe get clear about it. There's a real effort, which I think also um, comes from, or maybe precedes, maybe the temperament precedes the training um, in analytic philosophy, um, in the sense that you make real efforts to clarify positions of public opinion. There's a lot of we and our, uh, where it's not necessarily clear that you are even participating in we or our, but you make um, a real effort to clarify to the extent possible what public opinion on a subject might be. Um, can you talk about what the relationship between the narratorial presence and the sort of public opinion or intuitive presences
Yeah,
in the book?
I think that again comes from uh, analytic philosophy and its aims. It's an attempt to understand common sense. I think that's historically I mean, that's the name of Socrates as well. What Take common opinion on a certain subject knowledge or whatnot, and then inquire after that. So there's definitely a Socratic element to the book. That would be kind of forerunner to the spirit of the work. That's definitely there. They'll obviously run on a very compressed scale. Um, so there's an inquiry into what are our shared concepts, and in what sense are they confused, and that is again a classically philosophical way to sort out conceptual confusion. So yeah, I mean, look, I did a PhD in it, and I spent a lot of time steeped in philosophy for many years. So it makes sense that it would show up in various ways within the work. But I don't think I necessarily undertook it with a sort of the spirit of delineating concepts, or so in that sense I undertook it maybe more with the fiction writer's exploratory spirit, but it's bound to reflect years of that type of analysis and thinking.
I think that's absolutely true. I don't think it comes across at all like analytic philosophy. For one thing, it's like not boring. Um, but I also I think that's an important feature of uh, what you've done, and um, I'm And I'm interested in the book. In the preface to it, talks about possibly providing an opportunity to consider anew certain subjects, and also perhaps participating in the construction of new worlds, which is not really a role that analytic philosophy bestows upon itself. And I guess I wonder what role you see this book in particular, and perhaps your body of work more generally having
Well,
in norm construction, maybe something like that.
right. I mean, here I think common sense is investigated, but it's not. Analytic philosophy typically defends common sense.
Yeah.
It tries to vindicate it, show that basically we're right about the things we thought we knew. This book is not, and that this is much more revisionary in that way. That I don't have a prior commitment to seeing our everyday opinions legitimized. So in that way, it's that's definitely a departure. There's a interest in sorting out confusions and reconceptualizing where and as necessary through all of these sort of domains where our intuitions don't quite add up, or we are unwilling to sort of deal with the consequences of a certain opinion. There's an attempt to say, well, let's go back and let's see what sort of coherent notion can be built, or let's even before that, let's notice that we're saying two things that don't really square. That would be the initial stage, and I think many of the pieces try to confront that sort of issue.
Do you want to read one more concrete
Sure.
thinking?
Okay, concrete thinking. The parable is sometimes derided as the most artificial of narrative forms, scrubbing away the motley accretion of detail to be found in documentary forms of imitation or mimesis. Yet spare, morally instructive, illustrative tales mimic real-life storytelling far better than the more oblique accountings of events which lack the clear practical import, the point that outside of expressly aesthetic context makes lending one's ears a sensible proposition. Parables merely refine the anecdotes we offer each other every day in conversation. Someone asks our advice on a decision they need to make, moving to a new country, taking a new job, getting married. How often do we begin to offer our wisdom thus? Well, my friend moved to Shanghai, or a former colleague of mine left for a company like that, or my cousin actually married his high school sweetheart. As forms of reasoning go, anecdotes and their more refined cousins are elemental. It is no accident that most of the world's religious traditions are conveyed through them, and that philosophers since Plato have often grounded their ideas in them too. This is thinking via story rather than theory, and it is far and away the most pervasive form then and now. The morals of parables are often accused of patness, reducing the complexity of the world to truisms. Yet the more we examine them, whether the Garden of Eden, Billy Budd, or something altogether less artful, the more meaning we tend to find. Unlike a neatly stated theory or even an allegory, which cuts its story to fit ideas already in hand, a great parable is a vast quarry of sense. Through its particular relation of characters and events, the authentic parable gestures at where veins of significance run, while leaving the audience to conduct the extraction for itself. Lesser parables, they aren't worth the name really, can fall into allegory, of course, just as fables like Aesop's do. Yet even these wooden tales pull their insights from the minds of anecdote and parable, the living embodiment of our wisdom.
Thank you. This, I think, actually is my very favorite piece. Thanks for reading it. And it too comments on a number of things that run throughout. And quite subtly, it picks up questions about enchantment and secularism and community and what sort of holds us all together And I wonder what emerged for you about those ideas in writing um, this book, and um, whether you think we're lacking for common languages, or whether you think we're finding something like that.
In terms of the notion of enchantment, you mean, or
I guess so. It does come up a number of times. Maybe we're not lacking for them. You do posit that sports might provide something like that, and but there seems to be some questions about what common languages or what communal norms remain
right?
available.
Yeah, I certainly explore those. I don't know if either in the book or in real life I have a sort of final opinion on that, but I think you can't seriously think about 21st century life without wondering about its sort of spiritual core or lack of such a core. That's a recurrent question through so much of the literature, right? All this discussion of authenticity, what David Shields referred to as reality hunger. This has been going on for a while now. So I think that is, it's not avoidable. We live in a kind of hall of mirrors, a virtualized world. So you're going to have questions about, you know, about how well grounded that world is, how much does it disconnect us, et cetera. So yeah, it was unavoidable. I don't think it was a conscious effort to address any particular norm, but I don't think you can talk about modern life without the issues of fracture and disconnection. I think almost pretty much anyone would accept that.
What sorts of parables did you have in mind for this moment, or did you have
Well,
any in mind?
an obvious reference would be much of Kafka's work really
Mhm.
breaks down into those kinds of tales that do have they're illustrative in various
Mhm.
ways. In the same way that the Decameron is, or that the Canterbury Tales are, full of, or Thousand and One Nights. They're all full of, bits of wisdom that are not always didactically structured per se, but I think we draw wisdom from them in any case. And once we've put them in a certain shape, we might say, well, this has a point. But they don't always occur to us in that way. They occur as instances of life, or instances of the imagination. And after the fact, we sometimes see in them, or a suggestion in them that we can apply elsewhere. I think that's the connection between everyday life, anecdote, and the most refined form, which is sort of the purified form, which is the parable. But I think they're ultimately connected to sort of quite contingent empirical truths, and not something sort of a priori, or, um, you know, flowing from top down. They're really bottom up kinds of truths. And the bottom sometimes with some of these tales can be the imagination itself. So let's say Kafka would be an obvious reference point, Beckett. Um, and there are more ones, perhaps. I don't know. I don't read much literature from recent times, so it's harder to say.
Do you think that's a form that's still available to the contemporary writer? Should the contemporary writer pursue it?
Yeah, there are people working in short forms, and I sort of think that we work in real life already in the form, and I think to what extent we even need the refinement of parables is a question that we're already steeped in. That it is our everyday mode of being, is to instruct, to guide, to even to guide ourselves via these sort of conceptions. So the narrativity is already there. I suppose you have authors who work in these forms. I don't know how much. It depends on your sensibility, whether it, just as in their life, how much you're aligned with their sensibility, the guidance they can offer you. So if you take someone, say, from more like a 90s figure like David Foster Wallace, he can offer guidance so long as you are similar to him, as it were. And so I think someone like him does offer, guidance. He obviously wrote many a short story, and more than that, I think probably his essays are even more a moral guide to people. So it depends how much you're in resonance with those particular characters. And there are more recent ones. Ben Lerner, say, someone would see themselves in those tales, and therefore find them useful guides because there's enough of a common core to talk about that. If, of course, you're more eccentric, you might not find that type of guidance. I rarely find any guidance in other writers in that way. I sort of trust to myself and my own imagination, but I think it depends on how you feel about how connected you feel to the community, or how much you feel your situation is parallel. I don't read that many stories. I don't read that much. I read enough to have a sense of what goes on, but I can't say I've been terribly steered or directed myself by a lot of those things. I would say the more wisdom I find is in the everyday chit chat with a cashier or an airport worker. That I'm more likely to find something of value there than in maybe some of the types of stories we have told. But that itself is a longer story.
Okay, the refinement in the refinement, something is lost for you.
Or the types of people who publish stories, I mean, are and the types of tastes of editors, those all play into what you're going to see on a bookshelf. So I don't identify with the kind of, collapsed sort of hapless kind of protagonist that we find in so much recent literature. But I suppose if you did, with a Jeff Dyer type of narrator, the sort of Woody Allen-ish kind of quality of many of characters of, say, contemporary fiction, or even, frankly, that's too limiting. Even many of our pieces of journalism isn't the narrator often a kind of guy sort of shrugging his shoulders and observing and speaks with not so much authority as merely acting as a witness or kind of testifying to what he saw. That kind of position I personally don't connect with very strongly, but that's obviously, it depends on who you are. So some people are going to find a lot in that because they feel hapless, they feel rudderless, and then those stories can provide sort of guidance. Everything is going to depend on that arrangement and alignment between you as an individual and the kind of community that we have, and that's going to, it just varies a lot.
This book does a lot of considering of community and of ethics and those norms, and some amount of considering of the role of story in that. Do you mean then that the only a narrator with whom we relate can be a narrator who provides us guidance? Can we be guided by narrators who don't, with whom we don't share personal?
Yeah, I think we can. I mean, you can seek that out if I was taking your question to be more how is literature commonly read rather than how we could read it. I think it's commonly read in very foolish ways, but that's just another story. I think you can pick up so much from almost any piece of literature, depending on how curious you are, how much you're willing to read against the grain, how much you're willing to read against yourself, as it were, and how much you want literature to reinforce your values and please you, and how much you're happy to have literature test you. And so I would say, for me and the kind of book that I've written here and the kind of works that I maybe try to steep myself in, I prefer those kind of tests of selfhood. But it's hard to say. It depends what you care for. But I certainly think you can sharpen your mind against literature so long as you're willing to risk being unhappy with yourself when you finish a book, or feeling that your own interpretive skills are inadequate, or that the picture that painted of you is somehow inadequate, and that could be a spur to change. So absolutely.
All right. Well, that very helpful. Thank you so much. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks to SKYLIT.
Thank you, SKYLIT.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Rachel. Just because we kind of ended the conversation talking about reading strategies and practice, I'm curious, is there a book that you've read that stuck with you in this very strange year in which many of our habits and practices have been disrupted?
Why don't you take a shot at that, Rachel?
Oh,
Yeah.
I have oh god, I can't think of.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
I can think of something I read recently that I was very impressed with. It's not written recently, unfortunately, but Herman Brock's The Sleepwalkers, which I was really bowled over by, and found that that's essentially 1930s, 1940s kind of literature, and many people have commented on the resonances between that time and some of the tumultuousness of our sort of era, and the book. I mean, the title tells you something about it. It's about the sort of sleepwalking that people do, the ways in which they don't see, and I was very shaken up by that work. So I certainly think. And it's a work that challenged me in certain ways. It's sort of philosophical and sort of showed in some ways the silliness of philosophy in certain respects. So that would be a work that pushed me.
And I've read Vladimir Sherov's The Rehearsals this year, and that's a Russian work that does a lot with the idea of the end of the world and the failure of the end of the world to manifest, the fact that the end of the world doesn't actually come. And I found that to be an interesting idea to play with this year. So
Yes, we've had a lot of world-ending moments throughout this whole year, and somehow time continues.
yeah.
Oh, thank you both. Thank you for that really fascinating conversation. It was such a pleasure to listen to you both. So again, everyone, thank you for listening. The book today is Points of Attack by Mark De Silva, and he was in conversation with Rachel Allen. Mark and Rachel, thanks again. I hope you have a lovely day wherever you are in the world, and hope we can have you in the store someday soon in person.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Maddie.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the SKYLIT Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylitbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.